We're now officially halfway through 2023, and I'm way ahead of my goal to beat 100 games for the 4th consecutive year. Here are my final thoughts on every game I beat in June of 2023 and their rankings based on how happy they made me. I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't really understand the allure of this game. I recognize that it's 20 years old now, and so, it's dated, the controls are clunky, the UI is really rough, it's very cluttered, and some of that, if not most of it, is an issue with the times, right? But I don't think that's all of it, because I've played a lot of games recently from the PS1 and PS2 era, the original Xbox era, and I don't have the problems that I'm having with this game every time I play one of those games. The game itself is just boring to me. The story is very vanilla. The combat is barely serviceable. It's really slow and imprecise. The boss fights were kind of a nightmare for the most part. There was one that was okay. And the writing is dumb. Is it just that I don't get it? I recognize it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's just not that fun. It's the RPG elements are very basic. Spend this much XP on more health and that kind of thing. And there's spells and stuff that I didn't get that into, but the spells that I did get to they're just real basic. This game suffers in my opinion, from the problem that a lot of games from this time did, which was it kind of trying to be everything, and so it's not really good at anything. And maybe that's just a Peter Molyneux thing. I don't know, because this game seems like it was. I remember a lot of the marketing making it seem like this game was really ambitious, but the game itself is just very vanilla. There's nothing really that compelling about it. I can't really think of one thing about this game that I think is really solid. There's nothing. There's nothing about this game that's really good. Nothing. There's a lot of stuff that's okay. The combat is okay. The story is okay. But that's about as good as anything in this game gets. It's a lot of just okayness and some really bad stuff, like the UI. The UI is terrible. The voice acting is really bad, but again, I'm not going to hold that against the game, because the voice acting in almost every game was really bad in 2004. But overall, it's just not really an excuse for me. I just don't think this is a very good game. It was a slog to get through, even considering how relatively short it is and how not that difficult it was. Aside from the final boss. The final boss only killed me a few times, So whatever. I'm glad that it's done. I'm glad that I can move on. I will play 2 and 3. I'm planning at least to try to. I want to get them all done before the new one comes out, probably next year sometime, but I'm not going to be in any rush. I'm not going to be in any rush to get them done, because I didn't really enjoy this. So I'm ready to move on to something else, but, hey, whatever. If you enjoyed this game, or, for people that did really love this game, good for you, but I'd be curious to know what it was that they really loved about it. What about this game is amazing? The morality system, I guess, was influential. It was really kind of a big deal at the time, and so I can understand that that's something that I might not really appreciate now, because that's in all kinds of games now, and it was at least a little bit more novel here, probably quite a bit more novel, but that's not going to make me enjoy it that much more, honestly, and I didn't really do a lot of side stuff, so I didn't see how my ethical stuff affected the story or whatever, but the main storyline didn't seem to matter at all. There were a couple of important choices, and maybe that would have had an effect on the ending, but the end of the game just kind of ends, so I'm not sure how it would have affected anything. Anyway, it's over. I'm glad it's over. I'm ready to move on. That's about as simple as a game can be. But you know what? I gotta say, games this old don't really usually have decent boss fights. Kirby's Dream Land, the original Kirby, pretty decent boss fights. I'm actually pretty impressed with the boss fight quality. The game wasn't that hard, but it would have been a lot harder if I hadn't been basically spam saving to where I essentially had unlimited lives. But I wasn't going to risk starting the game over. I'm not sure I've ever beaten a Game Boy game before. I've played a couple of Game Boy games when I was a kid, but only one I remember playing is Tetris. You can't beat that. At least not in the endless mode or whatever. So, yeah, not bad. I don't know what I could say. What I could say. I mean, like I said, this is about as basic as a game get. When I'm gonna rank a game like this, thinking about like how much I enjoyed it, I have to put it against games like Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario, and those are good examples because Super Mario is pretty much flawless. The original Super Mario I really loved, but it's also really basic. This game actually feels maybe more complicated because of the whole eating mechanic. To start a new adventure? No. We're not doing extra game. We're not doing anything. No. No. And, and I gotta say, like, the first Sonic had a lot of jank. And this game, as basic as it is, doesn't have a lot of jank. Like, once I figured out how to use the controls, I mean, it's, there's not a lot of variables, so there's not much that can go wrong, So, yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see where the series goes. I'm going to probably play Kirby's Adventure after this at some point. Well, I'm not probably, definitely. So, I mean, this is, I don't have any, I'm stretching already because I'm thinking like this is going to be a lot shorter than most of the final thought sequences that I have for most games, but I just don't have much to say. It's a for what it is, it's a good game. It only took me less than an hour to beat it, but yeah, it's decent. I really do. One of the genres that I have discovered when I've started beating games more recently is some of these like narrative-driven, moral choice, branching narrative adventure games that don't have any combat or boss fights or anything, or RPG elements, but they have all the alternate endings and stuff, like the Detroit Become Human type games and stuff like that. And this is obviously one of those, but a very different one. It's very unique in its gameplay mechanics and just the way that it's designed. And I enjoyed it. I did. I'm going to go ahead and say that I didn't enjoy it as much as something like As Dusk Falls, because in that game and in some others, I really, and like in some of the the Dark Pictures games, I really felt the weight of some of my decisions. Like I felt like I had an idea where things are going. In this game, I didn't really feel that as much. It didn't feel like as obvious to me that my decisions had weight. I would get choices for how to respond to someone, and they all seemed pretty close to the same. Or when I would choose one, it wouldn't come out the way that I thought it would. Well, it was. I was trying to give a genuine answer, and it would come out like really sarcastic or something. So I didn't feel as much agency. I didn't feel as in control. And when you're not in control, you feel less bad, less guilty when things go wrong. I guess I got a good ending, but I don't know if I got the best ending. I don't know what endings could have been worse. And I didn't really feel like I was as involved in it because I couldn't feel the weight of my decisions. So it didn't feel like it was my fault that... It seems like maybe I could have... I'll stay away from the details, but like there seems like there's things maybe I could have done, but I don't know. I don't know for sure. It didn't... It never made itself clear. So... Yeah, when you don't understand the weight of the decisions you're making, you don't feel as guilty when things don't go your way. It didn't feel like my fault You know, like when somebody died in one of the Dark Pictures games, like The Quarry is a really good example. I felt really responsible. I felt like those people's blood were on my hands. When I got the ending to this game, it was just like, well, I don't know, that seems okay. Seems like it could have been a little bit better. Seems like it could have been a little bit worse, but I don't know what I could have done differently. I don't know. I don't see my error, so it's harder to feel responsibility. You know, I think that's my main critique of this game. And, you know, maybe that's a me problem. Maybe I just didn't understand it as well, or this is different enough of a game that I just wasn't as plugged in as I could be. I don't know. But I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed the art direction. I really enjoyed the voice acting, and the writing was top tier. The story was extremely interesting. So all of that was great. It's just the actual, as part of this genre, I have a little bit of trouble appreciating it because I just couldn't feel the weight of my decisions all the time. Everything seemed, a lot of the choices seemed arbitrary. I wasn't clear on what the stakes were. I didn't know what could be done and what couldn't. And so, you know, like in those Dark Pictures games, it's very obvious what the goal is. You're trying to get everyone out alive, right? This wasn't like that. I doubt there's an ending with this game where everyone dies, you know? But what were the goals? I don't know. There's a couple. I have a couple. I mean, one, there were a couple of clear ones, but there were some other ones I was very clearly making decisions for some kind of positive outcome that I didn't understand. So how do you get really plugged in with something like that? So I struggled a little bit with that. So that's probably why it's not going to rank quite as high as something like As Dusk Falls, which I think is a really good example of that, or The Quarry, which is another excellent example of that. But I still did enjoy it. I think it was, you know, those games have their own subgenre, and this is a very unique version of that subgenre. So I appreciate that. I can recognize that that's something that brings value. I am going to play the second one on day one, I think. So, yeah, I enjoyed it. This is one of those games that is definitely going to suffer in my brain because I didn't play it when I was younger and the game was newer. If I had played this game when I was 17, when it came out, it probably would have been one of those like Fight Club-like moments for me where like some form of media has just changed my whole perspective on life. You know, because it's that heavy, like the way that some of the later themes are brought in and everything. It's really intense, and it's very deep, and it's really actually amazing how accurately Hideo Kojima has described social media in the 2010s and 2020s, way before I heard anyone else talking about it. I mean, that's incredible. There are some incredible things about this game. The story is awesome. You know, the characters are great. The way that it's done so cinematically, you know, I know that it's not 2001 anymore, but I've played a lot of games from that era. There ain't no game that's on the level of Kojima when it comes to providing a cinematic experience in a video game. There's just nobody else that was doing it. He started it seemed, as far as I know. So that's incredible. Again, like the theme, the way it's just like meta commentary on like what a video game sequel even is amazing. There's nobody else doing that in 2001. And you know, I think for me that's where the praise really ends. But that's important. That's significant. The issue is that for me now in 2023, the gameplay for this game is a nightmare. I just wanted to throw my controller through a window like every 5 minutes. I'm trying to interact with something and I crawl instead, or I'm trying to crawl and I end up shooting instead. There's just a lot of that. And some of that's on me because I'm just not used to the control scheme, and it's a very unique control scheme. But I think anyone would agree that by today's standards, the gameplay mechanics of this game are really clunky. I rank games based on how happy they make me. There were parts of this game definitely picked up in the second half. I think it got a lot better. I got used to the gameplay mechanics a lot more. Plus, it really gets into the meat of what this game is really about in the second half. And the boss fights were much better in the second half than the first half. I didn't really love the boss fights in the first half that much. So I think it was definitely, objectively and for my happiness level, I think a better game in the second half than the first. I think most people would agree with me there, even big fans of the series. But I rank games on how happy they make me, and honestly, man, I was so frustrated with this game, especially in the first half, over and over and over again. And some of that I think that does have to do with some objective things with the gameplay, but a lot of it's just this isn't exactly my kind of game. I'm not very good at this game. I'm not very good at it. I died a lot. I was frustrated a lot. I lost progress a couple of times because the checkpoints decided not to be kind to me in certain areas, although usually the checkpoints were very gracious. But on a pure enjoyment level, I think I probably enjoyed it more than the first one. Probably. I'll have to think about it, but a cinematic experience like this is not really why I play video games. It's great, and I enjoy it, and I appreciate it, and it's cool. And there are games that I especially more recent games that I think they really nail that. But by today's, I can't go back. I can't jump in a time machine and go and play this as a 17-year-old kid. If I did, it would rank higher. But I can't, and I just don't enjoy this game as much as anybody that played it in 2001. That's impossible. I just can't. I don't have that nostalgia tied to it. But nostalgia aside, because this game does stand tall on its own merits, I just can't enjoy this game the same way that big fans, I've got friends that this is their favorite game, period. And I just can't get on board with that. If I had played it in 2001, I probably would have been a lot closer. It's still not exactly my kind of game, even when I was a kid. But I could understand that a lot better. I just feel so disconnected from that type of experience now that I just can't enjoy it. Now I just want to make sure that because I know a lot of people really love this game. I want to make sure that I'm clarifying, that's a me problem. I do think there are some objective issues with the gameplay mechanics. I think that the controls could be better, but outside of that, the reason I am not able to enjoy this game the same way that my friends could when they were 17, those are me problems. So, but I don't rank games objectively. I rank them based on how happy they made me, and this game had moments that made me pretty happy, especially toward the end, but overall, I was just trying to get through it mostly, It was a hard game for me to enjoy, so. But, I can still obviously see the value of it. I mean, it's actually incredible on that front, how influential it has been and how really incredibly prophetic the game is, and how smart Kojima obviously is, and how influential this game was for the time. I can appreciate all that, but that's not how I rank my games, so oh well. Let's get this stuff out of the way first. This genre holds up better than any other genre from this era. I've been playing a lot of survival horror games from the late 90s and early 2000s lately. The first one, Code Veronica, stuff like that. And it holds up really well. It still plays really well, even though controls are a little clunky, whatever, that's part of the gig. And I don't mind it so much as I do in first-person shooters or in other just action RPG games. that I've played, it's some of those don't hold up, and this genre really does, and this one is no exception. I thought the combat was fun. I loved the resource management. I liked a lot of things about this game that I love about survival horror in general. The resource management stuff, the ammo conservation, and knowing when to use health and when to look for save points and all that stuff. Killing enemies, the combat, all that stuff is really fun. The story's interesting. The enemy design is super cool. Really, those things about when you think of Silent Hill, like those things are on point in this game. However, my understanding is that most people think that this is the best game of the series, and I've only played 1 and 2 so far, but I liked 1 way more. And let me tell you why. I didn't... in 1, you go to Silent Hill, right? And then it's like, okay, you're in the school. You go to the school for like an hour and a half, and then you go to the hospital for like an hour and a half, and then you go to a bunch, and you fight a boss at the school, and then you go to the hospital and you fight a boss at the hospital, and then you go 2 or 3 other places and you fight bosses there, and during the course of the game you kind of have to explore the whole town. This game wasn't formatted that way. You go to one place, like at the very beginning, you go to the apartment buildings, and you're there for... Oh, shoot. You go to the apartment buildings, and immediately, at the very beginning of the game, and you're there for like 3 hours! Or I was, and it got a little bit boring after a while, and there wasn't... I mean, there was kind of a boss, I guess, at the end of that part, but there wasn't a boss at the end of most of a lot of the hospital. And again, why are we going back to the hospital? Why are we going to a hospital again in the second game? You only go to there's only 3 really big places in this game. Why is one of them a hospital when that was such a big part of the first game? And the first one had so many more interesting characters. I thought Sybil was a really interesting character. I thought the old lady was a really interesting character. This game, I don't know, everyone just seems crazy. Just everyone's unhinged, and that's the whole thing. And in the first game, the old lady didn't seem crazy. She seemed evil, but she didn't seem crazy. Sybil wasn't evil or crazy. It's just in this game, it's like, oh, everyone's acting super weird. I thought, so I got kind of bogged down in some of the areas. Even though this is technically a longer game, it felt shorter. Because there was so much less to do. And during the course of the game, I didn't really have to explore the city at all. There was one time after the hospital that I just walked around for a while because I was looking for health and ammo. And that was the only time I really explored the city at all. Really, the only other building I ever went into was the bowling alley that one time, and that was for a second. Outside of the 3 buildings that you go into in this game. It felt sparse. It felt really bare bones. I didn't think the enemy design was nearly as interesting as the first game. The only thing that's really better about this game is that it looks technically better because it's a PS2 game instead of a PS1 game. But I didn't think the enemy design was that good. I didn't think the level design was as good. It seemed like a game that they could have made fleshed out a lot more, that they just kind of threw, all right, you're going to do these things for a few hours and then the game's going to be over. Now, I just want to be clear here. I'm not saying I didn't like the game. I did. What I'm talking about is that I don't understand why people think this is the best one in the series. I think the first one was better in every way. I mean, if you have a game that goes from PS1 to PS2, or goes to the next generation of consoles, and it's the next game in the franchise, I'm expecting some big improvements and additions to the gameplay mechanics, or even some little ones. I just got done playing God of War 3, which was the first PS3 version, and that was more God of War, but it added some stuff, it improved on the mechanics, added some quality of life stuff. I guess it's a little different going from PS1 to PS2 than PS2 to PS3, but this game it looked a little bit better, but it didn't other than that, it could have just been DLC. You know, it didn't really add. It wasn't different at all. Like, there wasn't anything that was added to the game to make it more interesting or to switch up the formula at all. And again, the story, I didn't think was as good. I thought the story in the first one was much more interesting to me. I don't know. Am I crazy? Maybe I'm crazy. But like, the story was fine. I thought it was an interesting twist at the end. Like, I thought that was really interesting. But I don't know. The first one was just cooler. It just seemed cooler to me. It was more novel. And again, like, I felt like I had to live in that world for a while in the first one. This one, I barely explored the city at all. The game doesn't make you do it. In the first one, you pretty much have to in order to get around to go to all the places you want to go. Again, this game felt shorter, even though it was longer, technically. It took me 9 hours to beat it. It actually took me longer than that because I died 10 times and I lost progress several times. But anyway, you know, whatever. I still really liked it. I still thought the game was really fun. I'm still very much looking forward to 3. I just don't understand why people think this game is so great compared to 1. I thought 1 was amazing, and I didn't feel like this game was amazing. I thought it was good. I didn't think it was amazing. I thought Silent Hill 1 was amazing, especially how well it held up, 25 years later. I think this series is struggling I think I'm struggling with this series for the same reason that I struggled with Gears of War. Struggling is a strong word, but I have some reservations about what I'm seeing as the series goes on in a very similar fashion to what I experienced with Gears of War, in that it's not that the sequels are worse, they're probably objectively better, but it's mostly more of the same to a degree that the novelty kind of wears off, because it's such a unique experience, the first game. So different from anything I'd played up to that point. I mean, the closest thing to it is maybe like Devil May Cry, but that's a very different kind of game. And so it was, it was so refreshing when I played the first one, which was only a few months ago. I didn't play it when I was younger, and I felt the same way about Gears of War. But then I played Gears of War 2, and it was like, well, I mean, it just feels like DLC for 1. And some of this has kind of felt that way too. Now, it's not exactly the same because there are different weapons, there are advancements to the story that I think are pretty interesting. And the combat does have some tweaks as it goes along that keeps it, fresh to a degree. But it's still more God of War, which again, it's not a bad thing, and it's going to rank well. I mean, I really did enjoy the game. It's just I don't know what else to say about it really. The gameplay didn't go in some crazy new direction. It's mostly the same. The story didn't go in some crazy new direction. It's more of the same kind of stuff. It's the graphics are better as the first true PS3 generation, 7th generation God of War game. And I did enjoy that, but I mean, that doesn't matter to me that much. I thought the art design and the music and all that stuff is all great. That's always been great for this series, and I did enjoy it. I enjoyed playing through it. It's fun to play through these games. They're not too hard. The puzzles are challenging without being overly obtuse. Oh, what I will say that I did like about this game that I didn't like about 2 and some of 1. They didn't have as many of those, hardly any. There's really only one section where you have to hurry and kill enemies before something happens, like when they were chopping at that chain. And there were a lot of sections, especially in God of War 2, where it's like you've got to push something down a hill, down a ramp or up a hill or something, but at the same time you have enemies that are spawning indefinitely. Yeah, you have to take care of while you're doing that. I hated that stuff, and they mostly got rid of that in this game. I don't know if they listened to feedback or they just decided to go a different direction or something, but I loved that was the case. So it will definitely rank higher than God of War 2 just because of that. But really, you know, the combat and gameplay was so ahead of its time in the PS2 titles that this is about the same, which is, you know, fine for PS3, but it was so revolutionary in PS2 era that made it so cool, that like put it above everything else, you know. I don't like a lot of PS2 games because most of them are too jank, but God of War is a very notable exception. And so, you know, now that it's a PS3 game, that stuff becomes a little bit less notable, you know. But you know, it's I guess I'm taking kind of a middle ground with this game, but I did enjoy it. I don't know if I enjoyed it as much as the first one. But if I had played it first, I probably would have, you know. It's just the novelty has started to wear off a little bit, but you know, I'm very curious to see. I've still got to play Ghost of Sparta and then Ascension after this, and then we'll move on to the reboot games. And so I'm curious to see if that formula. I know the formula changes in 2018, but I'm curious to see if the formula will change at all before then. I bet it won't. That's probably why they had to reboot it. But anyway, a great game. Still a great game. Very technically well done. The combat is top tier, really. This is like the gold standard of hack and slash action game. So you know, it's all around very well done. I really don't have a lot of specific complaints, and most of the other God of War games I did have a specific complaint, one or another, but here, not really. I have a complaint about the franchise. There's not enough boss fights. I don't like this game has 5, 6. I guess in a 9-hour game, that's not unreasonable, but I wouldn't mind there being a boss at the end of each level. You know, the boss fights are my favorite part, so that's just a personal thing, though. I'm not going to hold that against the game, but overall, great experience, loved it. I really enjoyed this game. It's got a lot more right with it than wrong with it. There are a couple of issues. I'll get to those in a minute, but I've heard this game be called a Souls-like, and it doesn't feel like a Souls-like to me. The combat's not slow or deliberate enough. The only thing that really reminds me of a Souls-like with this game is the bonfires and the Estus flasks. That's it. There's no corpse run. There's no universal currency to upgrade your character. There's no like slow methodical combat. It's mostly gunplay. So I wouldn't go into this expecting a Souls-like if you like that kind of game, which I do. However, it wasn't a problem. The gun combat was excellent. That was the best thing about this game. It was very well done, the gunplay. It was very responsive. It felt weighty. It was precise. It was satisfying. It was good. It was really good. Switching between weapons was cool. The effects that all the weapons had were cool. I really enjoy it. It reminded me, actually, the gunplay reminded me a lot of Borderlands. And the boss fights reminded me a lot of Borderlands, even though it's obviously tone-wise and loot-wise and all that stuff, it's a totally different kind of game. But the gunplay reminded me of Borderlands, which is a good thing, by the way. Borderlands has great gunplay. So I thought that was really, really good. The level design was cool. The enemy design was cool. The story is interesting. I'm glad that I played Chronos before the Ashes first, even though they're very different games, because Chronos is a Souls-like, and there's not really any gunplay at all. It was interesting to see how they took it a very different direction, but still had a lot of the story and even some of the same locations in the game. That was really cool to see. I enjoyed that. Overall, really, really enjoyed the game. Big fan. It's going to rank well. I really enjoyed it. gun combat that's really well done like this is always going to be satisfying. So I really enjoyed that. I did have a couple of nitpicks, and they're very specific, and they're about very simple things, but they really did affect my ability to enjoy the game. One is that the boss fights, as fun as some of them were almost all gank fights. They were almost all you're fighting a boss and his minions at the same time, and his minions never stop coming. Or you'll fight the boss for a while, and then his minions for a while, and then the boss for a while. But a lot of times it was everyone at once, which is frustrating, and it's hard to enjoy that the same way. But that was just a stylistic choice, I guess they went for, which is fine. But there wasn't a single boss, I don't think, in this game where it was just you and them. Not a one. I don't remember a single one. Maybe the tutorial boss, maybe, but I don't even remember that being true. A lot of the boss fights weren't really boss fights at all. They were more like Left 4 Dead style horde fights, which was cool. I enjoyed that. As long as I'm not fighting a huge boss at the same time, I don't know. That feels a little bit lazy to me, because it's like, it almost seems like they were like, oh, the bosses are too easy in this game. What can we do to spice it up? Oh, let's just throw a bunch of other enemies in there to make it more frustrating and complicated. And that's kind of how it felt to me. It kind of felt like the bosses were geared toward more of a PvE co-op thing, which this game has that. So that would explain that to a degree. It's really hard to balance that if you're trying to, appease the single player too. But I did think that the boss fights suffered a little bit. Some of them were still really good, but even with those elements, but I think that suffered a little bit. Or there were a lot of like or Ornstein and Smaug style bosses, or Godless Duo style bosses, where it's two different types of enemies that are fighting at the same time. There were a lot of those. Also, you can't remap the keys, which normally I don't care. I'm not one of those guys that needs to remap every key, but there are certain buttons, like photo mode is a common one, where I'll accidentally hit photo mode all the time. This one game didn't have photo mode, but what it did have is on the left stick, if you click it in, it changes the view. So you look over your right shoulder instead of your left shoulder. And so I'm doing this the whole time because I accidentally hit that button all the time, and all I wanted was to be able to turn that functionality off. Just remove that button. I'm never going to use that button on purpose. I just wanted to remove it. It's a very simple thing. I realize that part of that is just my quirk as a gamer, that's a thing that I do accidentally all the time, but most games, or a lot of games, accommodate for that kind of thing, and this game shouldn't really be any different. It's very, very easy to be able to remap the keys. Also, the map was a garbage map. The map was terrible. You couldn't zoom in and out. You couldn't see more than one floor. You couldn't toggle between floors, and they went crazy with how many floors the maps had. You take 2 steps, there'd be a 2-step thing. That's a different floor suddenly. And if you're on the top thing, you can't see anything below it. The map was almost useless for that. It was good to see where you basically were, just on the map in general, but to be able to actually use it to navigate, it would have been futile to even try. I never even tried. So the map was real bad. It's just a couple things like that would have been really easy to fix. The boss fight thing, maybe not as easy, but the remapping of the keys and the map were both real bad. Real bad. But, those are nitpicks. Largely, I really enjoyed the game. I'm very excited for Remnant 2, which comes out exactly 1 month from today, in exactly 30 days. So now that I've played Chronos and Remnant, I'm ready for Remnant 2, and I'm very excited to play that. I'm curious to see what improvements they might be able to make, where they take the story, if they make further changes to the gameplay. I'm not expecting the jump that I saw between Chronos and Remnant, but they might add some things or change some things up. Who knows? That'll be interesting to see. Overall, really, really, really enjoyed it. Definitely worth a playthrough. Don't play it if you're looking for Souls-likes to play, though. There's a couple of Souls-like type things. It's more like, this is a Souls-like, like Kenna Bridge of Spirits is like a Souls-like. It's not really a Souls-like. It just has bonfires and Estus flasks, and that's pretty much it. But great game. Really enjoyed it. Man. I'm really impressed by this game. I didn't know I was going to be playing a Souls-like when I started this game. I really didn't know anything about it. That's my favorite genre, so I'm a happy man. But not only that, not only was I pleased to be playing a genre that I already know that I like, but this is a good example of that genre. It's a very interesting specimen, I guess, for lack of a better word, because it's not like most of the post From Software Souls-likes that I've played. Most like late 2010s and onward Souls-likes that are trying to copy the From Soft formula, they try to take that clunky From Software original mold and say like, oh, but our game is going to be better because we've got really like precise controls, or we've got more weapon variety or loot variety, or we're gonna take, oh, you like From Software games, well, we're gonna do that but make it better for whatever reason. And they usually don't succeed, not because they don't add interesting things, but because the core gameplay suffers sometimes when people try to innovate on the From Software template. This game didn't really approach the Souls-like that way. It almost feels like it came out in 2009 or 2010, like right after Demon Souls, because that's what it feels like to me. This game felt like Demon Souls, the way that it played, the way that the boss fights were arranged, the way that the level design and everything, because it didn't have the polish of the later FromSoft games or any Souls-like, and the combat was clunky and slow. It was very, I'm gonna hit this button a full second and a half before the enemy gets to me, because I know it's gonna take that long for me to swing my weapon. It was, and that's how Demon Souls was too. It was a very, the combat was obtuse, clunky. The hitboxes were all over the place. But here's the thing, that's not bad necessarily. It reminded me, it was nostalgic for me. It reminded me of playing something like Demon Souls, or like one of those older, like the original Dark Souls, because it was really that lack of finesse really gave it some charm that, for me personally, harkens back to those older Souls-like days, where it was kind of the Wild West of the Souls-like, and people were trying to still figure out what that was, and not a lot of people were trying to knock off, like, copy that formula yet. And I really enjoyed that. This game technically isn't that impressive. It's not that pretty. It's not that... the sound design isn't very good. Like, there were just places where there's just no music. And it wasn't that buggy, but it just wasn't that polished. It has a very indie feel to it, not even quite AA, but normally those are things that I would put in the negative category, but this game really does a good job of capturing the feel of those older Souls-likes, and I love those games for there's something I can't quite articulate about those games. It's like there's a mystique to them. It's almost like you're not even playing a game. It's like just a game that you dreamed about one time. Like, it's like, it's one of those games that it's like, I can't quite explain it, but this game made me feel that. It's a weird niche game that the story doesn't quite make sense, and it's got this mystical quality to it, and it's a VR game. This game used to be a VR game. How weird that this was originally a VR game that had to be ported for me to be able to play it in a standard format. How odd. This game is just very odd all the way around. So, but I really enjoyed it. There were some parts. There are a couple of things I didn't love. Toward the end, there's a huge difficulty spike in the palace area, about 2/3 of the way through the game. That it's weird because it's not like most difficulty spikes. Most difficulty spikes, it's hard and then it kind of stays hard. This was like there was this one part of the game about 2/3 of the way through that was just brutal, and nothing before or after it is that hard. So I didn't like that, but and then I had some issues with getting stuck in the environment, getting stuck on the walls at that point, but only at that part. So everything before and after that was lovely. I really don't have a lot of complaints. It's a short experience, but that's okay, for the kind of game that it is. It's much shorter than a Demon's Souls or Dark Souls, but I really enjoyed it. I really had a lot of fun with it. I'm very curious to know what Remnant's going to be like, because I thought Remnant was like a shooting game, like a shooter, like a third-person shooter, which doesn't seem like this at all. So I'm curious to see how they... And I didn't know that was a Souls-like, or that it was anything like a Souls-like, so I don't know if that stays like that. I'm curious. Well, I'll be playing the Remnant at the beginning of July, so we'll find out here in a couple of weeks. But yeah, really enjoyed the game. I'm struggling to describe why I love this game so much, because I think a lot of it has to do with this false sense of nostalgia and this weird mystique that I can't quite articulate why I enjoyed it, but I just did. So this game's probably going to get a little bit of a bump in the rankings. It's probably going to be ranked a little bit higher than it objectively deserves, because what I like about this game doesn't have everything to do with objective quality. But I don't rank games on objective quality. I rank them based on how happy they made me, and this game made me very happy. So it's not going to be a top 50 or anything, but it's going to do well. I really did enjoy it. Souls-likes are my favorite genre, and so I've only played one that I didn't like enough to finish. So I already knew I was probably going to like this game. I also knew that it was short, which I figured meant it was going to be a lot easier than most Souls-likes, and I was wrong. This game is hard. I only died 83 times, and I've died hundreds of times in other Souls-likes, but this is only a 7-hour game. I played Elden Ring for fucking 80 hours or something, so it was a big challenge, but it was a great challenge. This was an awesome game. The boss fights were the best part, but that's the best part of any good Souls-like, and every single boss that I fought, which was only the required bosses, was excellent. Excellently put together, very unique, most of them very unique, very well put together, lots of interesting move sets, and none of the bosses were easy. None of them were easy. Probably the final boss was the easiest. But they were all great boss fights. I'm going to have to think for a while as far as which one was my favorite, because I always choose a favorite boss fight in each game, but they were all good. Every single boss fight in this game was better than any boss fight in last month's games. And I beat 11 games last month. The world building was very interesting. The enemy design was whatever. Didn't really matter that much. I've seen better, but it wasn't terrible. The world, the level design was great. Excellent. Music and art design, the way the game looked technically was all really good. I don't really have any complaints. It was, I would have liked, if this game had been full-length Souls-like game, like a 30, 40-hour game, it would have been up there for me. Like, I would have really, really considered putting it in, like, top 20 territory. But the only reason that it's not going to probably be that high is it's just not a deep, rich enough experience. But for the time that I was playing it, it is surprisingly deep and surprisingly rich. The skill tree is pretty involved. The movesets and combat and weapons and everything are pretty varied. I mean, there's a lot of meat on that bone for just a 7-hour game. I don't know how long it took me. It was probably more like 8 hours for me. But I mean, that's the shortest Souls like I've ever played. And it's not even close. So, And it's, it's not a full price game, and it shouldn't be because it is a short game. But man, I really, really enjoyed it. Looked great, felt great to play. I don't really have any complaints. I mean, the only reason it's not going to be ranked higher is because it is a shorter game, and it's not as deep or rich as experience as, any of the Dark Souls games or Bloodborne or Sekiro or something like that. But I think I probably like this more than some of the other Souls-likes I've played recently. Star Wars Jedi Survivor comes to mind. This game was 5 times harder than Star Wars Jedi Survivor, at least. I mean, I died 5 times more in this game than Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and that game is 4 times longer than this one. And that's part of how I measure the quality of a Souls-like. If I only died 10 times playing a Souls-like, there's a problem, And I died 83 times in a 7-hour game in this one, so that was not a problem here. Really, really enjoyed it. It's on PlayStation Plus, so I didn't have to buy it. You didn't even have to buy it separately. It was a great deal, man. Loved it. Nice. If you want to play it like something for 2 days, if you do all the extra stuff, you can probably stretch it to 4. And and you like Souls-likes, definitely pick this one up. It's a fun game. This is really good. I put off playing this series for a decade because these narrative, choice-driven RPGs that aren't as combat-focused, they're more like relationship-focused, those kinds of games aren't exactly in my wheelhouse, or at least they weren't. And something that's got like a really, like where story is the really heavy focus, it's not exactly my kind of game. Story is not on my top 5 list of things I love about video games, but when it works, when the story works, it really works for me. But it's pretty rare that I love a game that's really heavily story driven. So I put off playing this series for a long time. I played the first Mass Effect 8 or 9 months ago, and I did enjoy it, but I enjoyed it about as much as I expected to. It's not exactly my kind of game. The combat isn't like the best, and there was a lot of sandboxy open world wandering around with no real aim kind of stuff. And that's not ideal for me, given what I'm trying to do with this whole 100 games a year thing. So I expected a similar experience with Mass Effect 2. Boy, was I wrong. This game is, in my opinion, based on my preference, this game is better in pretty much every way. I thought the story was better. I thought the characters were more interesting. I cared more. I was just more invested in all the different storylines. They took out a lot of that open world, sandboxy, wander around aimlessly stuff, like get in your rover and drive around the planet and looking for resources until you find something to do. There's not that much of that in this game, and I think it's better for it because it's this is the mission-driven format. It keeps me going. It keeps momentum for the game. Like I keep wanting to push through. It definitely has that, like, gives me that like one more mission feel. It's hard to put down. So I thought that was a vast improvement on the first game. And I can probably count on my hands, out of the 376 games now that I've beaten since 2020, how many I really, really wanted to 100%. And this was definitely one of them. Like, I felt a little tinge of pain leaving even just basic side missions behind, but the fact that I did all the loyalty missions for this game, that's unheard of, pretty much, since all those are technically optional. I never do that. So, I think that speaks to the quality of the game, but I was happy to do it. I'm not even sure I can quite articulate why I love this game so much, but this is going to be probably a top 25 game for me. This is the game that caused me to fall in love with Mass Effect. I after playing the first one, I just didn't quite get it. I figured, people that are really into that type of game, it's for them. That's why they're so passionate about it. No, I get it now. I recognize there are some people that like the first game more, and I appreciate that. But based on my preference, like, this game made me fall in love with Mass Effect. I'm so glad that I played it. It's so fucking good. The story is so good. The characters are so good. The world building is so... I mean, it's God tier, the world building. It's about as good as it gets. This has been an incredible experience playing this game. I cannot wait to play 3. I'm going to play it a lot sooner than I would have otherwise, now that I'm jazzed up about 2. I mean, all of the narrative-driven choice stuff I was really into. I'm not usually into that kind of thing. This game absolutely blew me away. For a game that's, you know, not super new. I mean, 2010, I think. It's games don't blow me away like that very often, especially not older games. If I put this is almost certainly going in the top 25, and if I do that, I think it might be the only game that's more than 10 years old and ends up in my top 25. I don't know if that's true. I'll have to look. But in any case, I'm so happy that I played this game. It's so awesome. I really don't have a complaint. You know, I mean, there were a couple of things with the controls that were not optimal, like the cover system was a little wonky. The skills in battle, assigning attacks and things like that wasn't perfect. But I mean, those are little tiny nitpicks. This game absolutely blew me away. So I cannot wait to get my hands on 3 now. So I'm sure I'll play that one soon. I'm going to have to do a lot of thinking about where I want to rank a game like this, because it so much embodies the kind of game that I like, one of the kinds of games that I like the most, that I just immediately fell into it and started grinding through it without even really thinking about how much I liked it. It was just a foregone conclusion that I was going to love it, and I did. And so I wasn't even really reflecting very often on, man, this game is really awesome. I was just in it. I was just playing through it. And, you know, I think that obviously speaks to the quality of the game. You know, I've always said Diablo 3 was one of my favorite games of all time. I realize that's an unpopular opinion. I know a lot of people like 2 better, whatever. But I didn't play 2 until last year, and I like 3 better. I think it's got more quality of life stuff. I like it's easier. I like the skill trees are less of a pain in the ass. And I don't know, I just liked it. But I enjoyed it more. I think the loot grind is better. I think there's more variety in loot. I think there's a lot of reasons that I like it better. But this game really does take all of the wonderful things that I loved about Diablo 3 and some of the things, really all of the things that I concede Diablo 2 does better, like the tone, the world building, the story. And it really... This is really the best of both of those worlds. It's got all of the wonderful dark gothic world building and character development and story and lore that 2 has, plus some. And it's got all the great quality of life stuff and great loot and you know, flexibility that 3 did. So you know, if 3 is one of my favorite games of all time, and this one's better in every single way, how could it not be ranked in the top 10 or even 5? But that being said, I don't know that it will be, because I think I'm falling off of loot games a little bit. I still love them, but I think I'm, you know, now that I'm beating games quicker and I'm not spending 100, 200 hours in a game like Diablo 3 or Borderlands 2, I think I've fallen off of that a little bit. So, is this one of my favorite games of all time? I don't know. I'll have to think about it. But the point is, like, I really have no idea where I'm going to rank this. I really have no. I mean, it's going to be in the top 25 almost certainly, but outside of that, I don't know. It could be 2, it could be 24. But the point is, the game is perfect. It's pretty perfect. I cannot, outside of just a couple of really tiny bugs right at the end, I can't think of a single thing about this. I can't think of a single thing about this game that isn't ideal. So, I mean, it's one of the very few games that I've beaten and come away from thinking there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It was executed perfectly. So, if I were to ranking my games by objective value, this would be top 5 for sure. But I don't do it that way. And I don't know that I quite enjoy the loot grind as much as I used to. So either way, though, it's still, I mean, it's an amazing experience. If you loved any of the Diablo games, 1 through 3, you're definitely going to love this one. There's no doubt about it, because it's got all of the best things of all of those games. I still have some questions about the story, but I won't talk about those here because I don't want to spoil them. But I mean, the game is amazing. It's an amazing game. This is one of the very few games that I will likely go back to and play more of at some point. So I'm actually not going to delete it from my console, which is something I normally do after I beat a game, because I may start a new character. That's what I would probably do if I were to play again. I wouldn't pick it up with the character I have and do the Paragon stuff. I'd start a new character because I want to see what their spells are like, you know? Anyway, I'll think about it. But yeah, amazing game. Really, I have no critiques, no notes. It is a triumph. Blizzard did it. Good job. They had a lot of expectations too, and they somehow managed to. I mean, I haven't read the reviews yet, but I heard whispers that this game is being reviewed well. So, good job, Blizzard. Well, I think objectively, this is one of the best video games I've ever played. Objectively. If I were ranking games just based on pure objective value, it's hard to put many above something like this. This game has a very, a bit of a Last of Us 2 sheen on it. I would actually say it's more perfect than The Last of Us 2, because The Last of Us 2 has definite big, deep flaws. But it's got that feeling that it transcends just another video game. You know? Like, you know, something like Hades is a really great video game, but that's all it really is. It's a video game, and it's hard to appreciate it beyond that. This is a game that really transcends the standard video game tropes in that it tells such a beautiful and complex story that I wasn't sure I was expecting. I mean, I knew that this game was good, but I didn't realize that so much of that had to do with like how hardcore the story is. It's a gut-wrenching game. It really is. Kind of similarly to something like The Last of Us 2. And also like The Last of Us 2, there's a lot of ethical gray area to be traversed. You know, the characters are all multifaceted, and there's nobody in this game that's really pure evil, not even the people that they paint that way. So like story-wise, I mean, this is God tier, and it's one of the prettiest games I've ever seen. It's beautifully written and well voiced. The graphics are insane. It's art and sound design is all top tier. This is a good example of something that I might consider a perfect game. It really doesn't have any flaws that I was able to detect. We haven't even talked about the gameplay yet. The gameplay is perfectly complex and nuanced without being overwhelming or clunky at all. It's extremely precise. Think like Sekiro Sifu kind of combat, and it's pretty perfectly done. There, I mean, if I'm really nitpicking, there were a lot of optional weapon choices, like offensive options that I didn't really get that into, but that's not an issue with the game. That just speaks to the fact that there's a lot of different ways probably to play it. I played it one way and I ignored some of those parts, and that's okay. It worked for me, and somebody else might have a very different way of playing it. But now, am I saying because it's a perfect game that it's my favorite game? No. I don't rank games based on objective value. I rank it based on how happy it made me. But I mean, this game made me pretty fucking happy, so it's going to be up there. It reminds me of something like a little bit like Horizon Zero Dawn, as far as like how much I really enjoyed it, and it was a similar kind of game. So it's probably going to be close to that, but I mean that's very close to the top. And the story, I think, is well, I don't want to say it's better because the Horizon Zero Dawn story is so insane and cool. This is more of like a just very hardcore, like heart-wrenching tale. You know, it's so good. There's really, I mean, I have no notes really. I really can't think of a single problem with this game, and not just that, but everything that I've mentioned so far is absolute god tier. I knew this game was going to be good. I'm not sure I expected it to be this amazing. I didn't do most of the side missions and stuff, but I did some of them, and they were great. Everything I did was great. So, no notes. I have nothing else to say. From start to finish, it was an absolute tour de force. So, good job, Sucker Punch. That's it for the month of June, and it brings us to a total of 65 games beaten so far in 2023. Have you already beaten any of these games? And if so, did you feel differently about them than I did? Let me know about it in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more gaming videos. Thanks for watching!